don't really know who Nas is. If he's 22, he's born in 03.
Not all of them, some of them.
I'm in the game. Jim Jones was never better than Nas. Jim Jones will never be better than Nas. And this is coming from somebody that's not a Nas fan. I love Dipset. I love the Diplomats. I love Bird Gang. But we not about to start rewriting history because Jim Jones got confidence.
I never got to, did I ever got to see Nas? I never got to sit down and have a conversation with Nas and things like that. I had called you about it and things like that. That was like still one of the people that I never got to have a conversation throughout my history of rap and things like that. I think I would love to have a conversation with Nas. I wouldn't know if he knows it, but Nas was one of my all-time favorite rappers coming up and things like that.
I've heard you say that.
Since the barbecue and things like that. Like he really put the whole dope boy rap, crack hustler, get fresh rap into perspective before anybody.
Jim Jones rolled up on Shannon Sharpe's podcast and straight up declared he's not just relevant, he's more influential than Nas. More important to the whole culture, period.
Showed up on Fat Joe and Jadakiss's podcast, and Fat Joe decided to stir the pot.
I recently saw a clip on Instagram where a young kid was comparing you to Nas and saying that you got
that's my young boy.
Big hits.
He's wild.
Yo, he looked to you. He learned how to wear the BB Simon belt from you. He got his swag. Like, how crazy is that? Because in my era, you know what I'm saying? Nas is like a god.
In my era.
The second those words dropped, everything flipped upside down. 50 Cent didn't bother firing off a petty post or dropping names. Nah, he just slid an old federal transcript onto Instagram and let everybody connect the dots themselves. Now folks are crawling through dusty wiretaps and pulling up receipts nobody thought would ever see daylight.
Jones went on Shannon Sharpe's podcast and said he's more influential than Nas.
Meanwhile, Jim's out here in the gym, pacing around like he's about to record 100 diss tracks or catch a case at Rikers. But this drama isn't only about Nas, and it sure ain't just about ego. It feels like 50's reminding the whole industry why he's still untouchable, and how some people somehow slipped right past indictments that should have ended them. Jim might have wanted to prove he mattered more than the legends, but he might have cracked open something way nastier than a music beef.
Nas. But remember, Nas' first record, The Barbecue, came out when I was in 11th grade.
Yes.
So Nas was my idol when I was young. Like you did, came to dressing, the wordplay, the music, everything. I was a superior Nas fan, period. I'd never take that away from him. But then as I got in the game, you gotta realize that your rivals would be idols, and not to take anything away from that, I developed my own style and my own lane that these kids start to gravitate towards the same way I gravitated towards Nas when I was younger and things like that. It's a whole different...
There's a reason every time Jim Jones brings up Nas, it hits like a sucker punch. Their tension didn't spark out of nowhere. This wasn't some harmless jab from one generation to the next. It goes all the way back to 2002 when Nas hopped on Hot 97 and went off, calling Cameron's album straight up whack for no real reason. That was enough to set Dipset off like a stick of dynamite. Jim dove right in and never looked back. It got messy quick, Nas and Dipset slinging shots on mixtapes, and Jim making it way too personal. He even threatened to smack the kufi off Nas and double down on that heat in tracks like We Fly High. And trust, this was never just music. It was something way deeper. Jim used to have nothing but love for Nas. Just a year ago, he wasn't throwing any shade at all. He'd talk about Nas with straight-up respect. But all that admiration turned to slick jabs overnight. Everything switched up the moment Jim hit Fat Joe and Jadakiss's podcast. And you know Fat Joe couldn't resist stirring the pot. That alone could have been just some messy timeline gossip folks forgot about after a week. But Jim wasn't about to leave it there. He couldn't hold back. He was itching to break it all down in detail. Then, out of nowhere, he unleashed one of the wildest takes hip-hop's heard in years. Jim didn't just say he was more relevant. He went all the way, claiming he was more influential than Nas himself. We're talking about Nas from Queensbridge, the legend behind Illmatic, God's Son, and King's Disease. The man still packing out Madison Square Garden while pushing 50. But Jim wasn't blinking. He didn't stutter once. He doubled down like he meant every single word. That interview didn't just stir up drama. It flipped the whole pot over and set the whole scene on fire before anybody could even catch their breath. And he wasn't finished. After the first podcast, Jim popped up on a whole different platform. This time, he pulled up on Shannon Sharpe's nightcap, ready to take it even further. Jim slid in next to Shannon and Chad Ocho Cinco Johnson, acting like he had receipts nobody else could touch. And instead of cooling off, he poured fresh gasoline right on the flames. Shannon wasn't about to let him skate by easy. He kicked things off by saying, but what Jim said next made fans hit pause like, did he really just say that? Just when everyone thought he'd finally stop comparing trophies, he came with one more reckless hot take. Jim started digging up the old Dipset versus Nas beef from the early 2000s, like he was flipping through a scrapbook of grudges. He claimed he was always a hardcore Nas fan, but insisted he'd passed him in cultural impact. He tried to smooth it over by gassing Nas up about his fashion, calling him one of the flyest ever. But every time he switched lanes, he kept circling back to the same message. Nas doesn't move the streets the way he does. And you could tell Jim was salty because he started clowning Shannon for his outfit, like the man had time to pick out a runway fit before the show. By then, Ocho Cinco was just sitting there like he was watching the wildest pay-per-view face-off of the year. While Jim was talking slick about Nas still rapping at his age, he suddenly flipped the energy and accused Shannon of dragging him on the show just to boost views. That's when Uncle Shannon lost it. He fired right back with, "This is the biggest podcast you ever been on." But Shannon wasn't stopping there. He switched up from chill host to straight-up opponent in seconds. If Jim wanted smoke, Shannon was about to drag him from the studio to the weight room. When Jim claimed he was better than Nas, Shannon didn't just question his bars. He came for his whole physique. Check this out. Instead of throwing shots right back at 50 Cent, Jim tried to spin the whole showdown into some kind of gym flex. He started challenging Shannon to a workout war, hoping he could prove he's still relevant and running the game, but in a different arena. While Jim was out here caught up in all the gym theatrics, 50 had already made his quiet power play behind the scenes, and that Individual One label was still hovering heavy over the whole situation, like a storm cloud nobody wanted to talk about. Meanwhile, the audience was going absolutely wild in the comments. Folks were losing their minds over the fact that a retired NFL Hall of Famer was standing up for Nas harder than half the rap game ever did. One fan even said, Shannon did what Fat Joe and Jada should have done. Jones, you delusional. Shannon, thank you for bringing it up. And honestly, that was facts, because why were they all so quiet during that first interview? While Jim kept yapping and Shannon was about to lift the entire gym just to make a point, 50 Cent was watching it all unfold from the shadows, and he wasn't cracking a smile. Just when everybody thought the whole mess had hit peak comedy, it turned straight up petty. That's when fans started digging up an old clip, the ultimate disrespect. Back in the day, Jim didn't just get ignored by Nas, he got laughed right off the stage. And here in 2025, that same energy was back, getting passed around like a viral meme.
You know, me, Jim Jones. No diplomats, no nobody else. Me, Jim Jones. Check my track record, then check everybody else's track record. Then go to the billboards and check all my entries, then check all them entries and and I'm not taking nothing away from nobody, but I hear the comparisons and then be trying to act funny when it comes. No, I've been spanking a lot of this about the industry. I've been putting on.
But it didn't even stop there. While Nas stayed silent and Shannon was bulking up, somebody else was locked in watching every second. Because the second 50 Cent caught wind of Jim's claim that he was better than Nas, he didn't blink. He just let out a cold laugh like he'd seen it all before.
Can I ask you a question, Jim?
I might have been a little.
50 Cent pulled out a couple receipts straight from his bottomless petty vault and set fire to one of the most controversial rumors in hip-hop history all over again. After he labeled Jim Individual One, the internet lost its mind. That one caption alone had people howling because if you know, Individual One ain't just some slick nickname. It's a federal tag ripped right out of a Tekashi 6ix9ine wiretap during the 9 Trey Bloods trial back in 2018. Prosecutors played a phone call they claimed featured Jim Jones. He wasn't named in court but was called Individual One. In that audio, a voice was allegedly telling gang members to violate Tekashi for flipping on the set. Jim's voice was never officially confirmed, and he was never charged with anything, but none of that stopped the streets from talking. The blogs, the forums, and especially 50 Cent never let that moment fade. So when Jim started puffing up on podcasts, trying to bait Nas into a back and forth, 50 saw his chance to remind the whole industry that folks hadn't forgotten. He went digging through his old IG vault and reposted a meme he'd once deleted in a hurry, the one that said, So that's why they ain't pull him in. Just like that, the rumor mill cranked back up to full speed. People were out here screaming, "Say it ain't so, Jimmy." Rewind to 2019. The Shade Room had posted updates from Tekashi's court case. A verified courtroom reporter claimed Tekashi named Jim Jones as a 9-tray member. And of course, 50 couldn't help himself. He jumped in the comments, throwing shade like it was a sport. Then came that infamous clip of 50 looking all wide-eyed and rattled, like even he couldn't believe the mess was real. He literally wrote, "I'm afraid for my life. I mean, Jimmy is gang." The internet was in stitches, but behind the scenes, Jimmy was low-key twitching. But here's where the story really takes a turn, because 50 didn't just wake up and decide to clown Jim over Nas. This beef has been simmering for years, and the Nas drama was the perfect excuse to drag Jim back into the spotlight. Way back in 2007, things started getting ugly when 50 Cent brought Jim Jones and Jules Santana out on stage during a G-Unit show, right when Dipset was already breaking apart behind the scenes. Cameron saw it as a straight-up slap in the face, like 50 was stomping on the group's last shred of unity just for kicks. Then fast forward to 2019, when Tekashi 6699's federal trial exploded all over the news. Jim Jones got tagged as Individual 1 in a wiretapped phone call that prosecutors played in court. Even though Jim was never charged, the label stuck like glue, and the internet went nuts with snitching rumors. Jim watched 50's posts stacking up, every single one, and for a minute he didn't say a word. He just posted a classic Bird Gang era throwback, dripping in Dipset nostalgia. The caption was pure side-eye. "Why you keep lying? LOL. I'm going back to sleep." And he didn't stop there. At the end, he slipped in. "Free mail matrix till it's reversed." A shout out to his longtime friend doing over 11 years on racketeering charges. That line was a jab straight at 50, like he was calling him out for living in some fake reality and spinning up a phony storyline for clout. But Jim wasn't about to sit quiet and let the narrative run wild. He fired up another Jim Flex video, this time captioned like he was sending a warning shot to anybody questioning his street ties. "Somebody tell Shannon Sharpe, don't start ducking this challenge now. You gonna talk like a podcaster or you gonna walk that talk? Because my sneakers are laced up," Jim fired off. "You already called me out in front of the whole world, so you might as well finish the job, champ." Then he turned to Ocho Cinco saying, "He told you he don't want to do it in public. Fine, let's set it up in private. I know his rep as an athlete is on the line, so as long as you're there to witness, let's run it. We don't duck no challenges over here. Size don't mean nothing where I'm from. Run it." While 50 Cent was still trolling from the sidelines, Jim looked like he was strapping on his boots, ready to turn this into a full-on war. And he wasn't finished stirring the pot. To really light folks up, Jim dropped another post that said, "If you 40 and up arguing with me about Nas, you already lost." He kept going. "You fell right into the bait. My streams spike every time I get Mel talking viral. And I'm showing you older artists how marketing works in 2025. You stuck in yesterday crying about how things used to be. Tighten up." Then he topped it off with a caption that was pure defiance. "I said what I said. P.S. I will wrap circles around any artist from my era who dares step in the booth and bring some money with you because this game ain't free. We out here in the field. Take that however you want, but just know we working every single day." The wildest part? While all this chaos was popping off, Nas stayed dead silent. Not a single word. Meanwhile, Jim kept baiting, kept poking, kept calling himself the most influential voice in the game. And if Nas ever decides to step in, this won't be some regular diss track. It'll be a full-blown lyrical execution. Fans have been calling Jim out left and right. Right now, Jim's still out here running his mouth, Nas is still quiet as a ghost, and 50 Cent is in the shadows, moving pieces like he's the puppet master of the whole circus. And if that unreleased wiretap is real, Jim might have just talked himself into something way bigger than a diss song. Because while he's out here rapping and flexing for the cameras, 50's been too quiet. And everyone knows, when 50 goes silent, that's when the bomb drops. So the only question left is, will Nas finally step in and shut this down with bars? Or will 50 let the streets handle Jim and leak the truth when it's way too late to run? Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this with everybody who loves the drama. And I'll see you on the next one.